and they were just asked to leave. And people would back the landlords up in them days, you know. And but personally myself, I was never asked to leave. Not to my recollection, anyway. Yeah.
What were your neighbours and community like in the 80s?
Well, I grew up in Clayport Gardens, and I used to work at the farm over behind Beacon's Dairy Farm. And my neighbours, they were all good people. You know, I was born there, 12 Clayport Gardens, and my neighbours there. There was a good community, and there was a lot of neighbourliness. And it was during the wartime as well, and everybody was out to help everybody else, you know. And then I moved away from Clayport Gardens, and when I got married, we moved up to St George's Crescent. And the same thing, the community in St George's Crescent. And if there was anything going on, all the parents used to get together and make sure that the kids had a good time out of it, you know. And then we, from there, we moved to St James's Estate. We got the first house we lived in for 6 years with my mum. And by this time we had 3 children. And then another one came along, new house, new baby, they used to say. So I had another daughter at St James's. And the community there was great, you know, the neighbours. And all the places where I've lived, always the new year, that was a big time. And everybody went around each other's houses and brought the new year in. And if you went to be someone's first foot, that was the first one through the door after 12 o'clock. You had to take a bit of coal and some silver and at least something to drink with you, so that you were taking like wealth and good fortune into their home. And if they came to you, they did the same thing. And you know, when times were tough, everybody knitted together. I found the community spirit was just great. All the places I've lived, I've found that. And of course, it's up to yourself as well. You've got to get dug into it, you know. In Clayport Gardens, when I was a boy there, I used to make extra pocket money doing the messages for the people round about the doors, you know. And you always kept a few empty bottles under the sink, so you used to get threepence back off an empty bottle, so you had at least ninepence for to go to the pictures, if that's what you wanted to do. But the community, as I say, was tremendous. I thought so.
What are your opinions on the right to buy scheme?
Well, I thought it was a good thing if you could afford it. And I remember when we first moved to St James, it was the first time that we had a chance to do that, and we made an inquiry to see if we could buy instead of paying the rent. And what we were told at that time, they weren't putting those houses on the market because they'd only been up 10 years. There was something to the effect that they hadn't made enough money off them or something like that. It was some sort of, I thought it was a ridiculous answer, but that's what we got. And but I think for young people, if they could afford it, as long as it was done in a correct manner and they weren't putting themselves in a position where they were struggling, you know, they couldn't afford to put food on the table because they were buying a house. You had to put a bit of thought into it, I thought, but I think it's nice for people to have their own home, if that's possible. Well, during the summer holidays, we had many things we used to get up to as children, you know, it was like groups of us, and we'd go down to the pastures, and just past the line bridge, there was a deep part there, and we used to get there, we always used to make a fire, and we used to spend a day swimming there. And unfortunately, when we turned hungry, we used to make our way along Walkergate, where the allotment gardens were, and sometimes the people would give you something, you know, but if they weren't there, we would help ourselves to an apple or something like that to see we through till food time at home. Go back to the river and swim, and when you came out to swim the river, the fires were burning, but you always put grass onto the fires to make smoke to keep the flies off you. And the other place was Rugley Wood. We spent hours and hours up in Rugley Wood. It was a great place, and as far as we were concerned, at that age we were in the backwoods of Canada or somewhere like that, and we used to build forts and that, you know, in case any marauding Indians came our way to hold them back. And we used to come home at night Go first thing in the morning, come home at night, dragging your feet, really tired, making plans for the next day. And now that place was what we called, for the recreation ground, the Lech, the Moorburn, and used to go down there and, make forts and just play in general. And further up beside the park wall, there's a place called the Targets, which during the war, the Home Guard, and it wasn't that long after the war, and the Terriers and that, they used to do their target practice there. And we used to go up and dig in the bank and try and find dead bullets and that, which was a treasure at that age. And sometimes we used to go, there was a gateway where the river went in, the gate was loose, and we used to sneak into the parks and have a good rake around the parks till the gamekeeper come out and he chased you and you always got back out again. And those were basically your summer holidays. You just, in the pictures, of course, there were so many nights when the pictures, the playhouse and the corn exchange, they were a lifeline to you. The pictures used to be Monday till Wednesday, the playhouses were in Philomon in the corn exchange, and on a Thursday it used to change till Friday, and then till Saturday, and on a Sunday night there was a totally different Philomon, and everyone went to the pictures on a Sunday night. Well, 99% of the population. It was a lifeline to everybody, the picture houses. So that's how we spent our summer holidays, basically. And very few people went away anywhere. Just those that was able to went away to different places. Odd times I would go away to Durham to my sisters for a couple of weeks and spend 2 weeks at Durham doing whatever was available to do there, And made friends there, and it was just like being at home, really. Same group of people, that you've seen every year if you went. But basically it was just what you did round about, swimming in the rivers, down to Allenmouth. If you went down to Allenmouth and you had your bus fare to come back, invariably you'd spend it on an ice cream van or something, and you'd walk the road home, well tired. The bottom of the bath would be full of sand. And them's the memories of your summer holidays, And back to school after, I think it was 4 weeks we had,
What were your memories as a miner in the 80s?
Well, all my family in this country, in England, all my family in around the Alnwick area, of course, Shilbottle and Whittle Pits, they were all miners, and they worked in the mines. My brothers, my fathers, my uncles and that, And they gradually made their way out of the mines to do different things, some of them. Myself, I never worked in the coal mines in England, but when I went to live in Australia in 1969, I was at steelworks for 6 months, and then after that I went to the coal mines with South Bulli Colliery, which was an English firm, and you went there, and when I hadn't worked in the mines before, I worked in the timber yard for a while, and then I went into what they call the small pit, which was, they called it the Balgownie pit, and you worked in there and you were claiming machinery and that, and then they opened up these long wall mines in the big pit at South Bulli, and I was moved on to that, and that was myself and another Alnwick fella, and there was about 6 Geordies on the team, and what you did with that, you had miners, and the mine cars took the coal, and you had like what they called a jib with a pineapple on, and you cut these roadways in, right, with them, and they moved that, and they've cut the roadways in, and it was like a bus, a double-decker bus cut off, and then it was an endless chain, and you used to go in, and as the miner was, they called the machine the miner, as it was cutting the coal, it was throwing it onto your tub in the bus thing, and we used to take them, shuttle cars they called them, that was the correct name, and you could drive them from either end, and you drove it out, and then you took it, and you put it onto a conveyor belt, which took it outside into the storage area outside the pit, and then when they got the block of coal ready for the long wall, it was about maybe 200 yards long, and it was maybe about a mile of it going out, and you you put the chocks into place. Now these chocks were Gullick chocks, and later on it became a German chock called Westphalia, and you put them with winches into position at the end of the block of coal, up what you call was going to be the coal face, and they were hydraulic chocks, and you set them to hold the roof up. And once you got that done, you put it was like a railway line you put in, which the cutter, the shearer, walked on. And it was 9 foot high, and it had 2 drums on it. One for cutting the bottoms out, and one for cutting the tops. And it had big teeth in it, and you operated off a battery on your chest, or there was what they called piano keys on it if they malfunctioned. And all the time there was water sprays. There's a cable came, you had your main gate, you had your supply road, if you can picture that, and then you have your main gate, you have your block of coal, what you're cutting the coal off, and at the end you have what you call your tailgate. Now those main gates, they run the full length of that block of coal, so you get supplies coming in from that way. And when you were cutting the coal, there was generators and that down at the face, and there was tanks which held the hydraulic fluid with all cables up onto the face for these holding these hydraulic chocks. And you would set the chocks, and then you would set the shearer away, and you would do a cut the full length of the face and up and down, which was like about 400 yards, and the coal would drop onto the chain. An endless chain underneath. And that chain would take it down onto conveyor belts, and a process of conveyor belts would take the coal outside. The Japanese used to buy all the coal from South Bulli, and they used to store it, and we believe they stored it in tanks underwater so it didn't lose any value, and they were using that for their steelworks and electric generating and things like that, to the best of our knowledge. And as you were cutting the face, sometimes you had problems. And behind the chock area, which held the face up, they called that the groove area. Now then, what you needed that was an area where the coal had been cut away, and on the floor you had like stone, and above the seam of coal was in between, and you had the stone roof as well. And when you were cutting with the shearer, if you heard a different noise, or you smelt like a brimstone, you knew your blade was too high and you dropped it a little bit, so you were just cutting the coal and not disturbing the roof. But this goof area behind the chocks, if it didn't come down on a regular basis behind the chocks, and you'd have to put what they call a brattice, which is like a fiberglass curtain, so that the air wouldn't disappear into there and it would come up the coal faces for you. There was always a warm air that came in. And if that happened, if it held up, when it did come down, it used to come down with tremendous force, and there was stones the size of this room would come down, and that was a very frightening experience, I must say, for myself, not having done that before. And once you got everything into place again, you continued cutting the coal, and it was taken out of the face with the shearers, and you had a thing called a plough, and it was behind the shearer against the plates where the endless chain was, and it ran up and down, shifting it had a boat-shaped front on it, and it was shifting any loose coal from behind the plates, so that you could, when you had cut that batch of coal out, that which was a width of about a metre, you would then lower your chocks and get them ready to move forward. But before you did that, there was a ram handle on the bottom, and what you did, you pushed the ram handle, and it pushed the plate and the shearer forward against the coal ready to cut again. And you then lowered the chocks and pulled the chocks in, and set them up again to hold the roof. So if you can imagine, you are moving forward bit by bit. And the camaraderie in the coal mines with the lads, it was always very good, because you relied on each other for your safety, and you had to do your job well. And you used to have what you call a crib time. Now then, 2 of you would stop on the face, which generally mean another lad, and the other ones would go down. And on these roadways where you got their supplies, and had other stuff in, like the generators, the tanks, there was cuts through there, and that's where they used to go in. You wouldn't believe it in this country, like, but they used to go in there and have your what you call your bait in this country. It was called it crib time there, and but the face was never stopped. The other ones would keep cutting the coal, and there was panels. The panels was the ones that was making the areas to make a new long wall. And when you cut that all out, that block of coal, you would move all your machinery to the next long wall and then carry on from there. And it was very productive. It was a hard coal, you know, very dusty. And you wore masks all the time, like, you know, with filters in. And I remember taking the filter out of my mask at the end of the shift, and I broke into the filter, and if you hadn't had that on, the dust was 3/4 of the way through the filters. And if you got a bit holed up, something that needed a bit blast, that you would drill a hole in. They had like a drill, and they used to call it, for want of a better name, a pig's head, because that's what it was like. You used to put the rod in the end of it and drill the hole in, and then the deputy would come, and he had the facilities, and he used to put the half stick of jelly in, as we called it. And you'd put I'm forgetting the name just for the minute. You put it in for the blasting, and then you connected up to his thing in his hand with the wires. Everybody would clear into the chocks, and he'd blow it, and that would blow that up. And then if you had trouble with the roof area, you would stop the face till you got it done, and you had what they call falcon drills, and you would drill into the roofs with these rods, and you would drill in, and you would put 7-foot rods on, you know, and till you drill in, and then you put these rods in, and on the end of them they had a tube. It was like a compound that it would set like cement, and you put that in, up in with the falcon drill, and then there was like a nut head on it, and you'd put that in, and you'd set that away, and that would put the rod up into the safe area of the ceiling, the roof, and it would spread itself out like that. As it hit in, it would spread out like that, and it would set, and it would stop the roof dropping. And those were the things that you did, and that was the coal mining in Australia. That was a good safe pit, had a good safety record, South Bulli. But a lot of the Australian iron and steel pits, they did not have such a good safety record as what we had. And there was about 9 pits along the mountainside. Wollongong, where we lived, was a coastal area, and the mountains went up behind it, and that's where all the coal mining was, in the mountains up there. And when I first moved, we were in the hostel, and for about 11 months, and used to have a job getting a house off the hostel, you know. And when you did get a one, the first house we got was at a place called Corrimal. You could see the pit from our front door on the mountainside, and we rented that house off some Lebanese people. Would you believe that? One of them had a garage, and they were wonderful people with my wife and the children, you know, them people. And then after that, you got a commission house, a council house, Australian, you know, and they wouldn't let you, if you had 4 children, you had to have a 4-bedroomed house. And it was all a new community there. And most of them were men that worked at the pits. You know, not all of them, but most of them. And the pit life there, I thought, I used to get 5 weeks holiday, and the pit, the management of the pit, they would, you got a hamper at Christmas, you know, a food hamper, and a ham and a Christmas card, every man, you know, because you could make bonus on top of your wage, you know. I was in what you call a swing shift. There was day shift, afternoon shift, swing shift, which took them from afternoon shift into the 2 o'clock in the morning, and then the day shift would come, you know. We were like what they call a night shift here. We worked that one, and you got extra money for the shifts and things like that, you know.
What about, there was one point where you talked about Australia.
How are
Yeah,
you?
that's
Was that okay?
brilliant, absolutely.
You pretty much understood what I was...
Absolutely, yeah.
Aye.
Can we talk a little bit about your
Yeah.
Go on then, ask a question, Carol, around that.
Did you have any family or relatives that worked in the mining industry?
Yes, my father, he worked at, what happened, my family, they came from Elsden. They worked in the mines at Elsden. There was a pit at Elsden. And my grandfather and great-grandfather, they came down from Elsden. And they came to Amble because the mines had closed up there. And some of them had been on farms, and they all came down to Amble, and they got employment at Shilbottle, which was the old pit then. Instead of the new pit, we used to go up what they called the Keeper's Bank, and used to turn left, and the old pit was down there, and that's where they worked when they first came, and then they moved down to the other end of Shilbottle, where the pit as we know was there now, and they were working in conditions anything from 18 inches to 2.5 foot, and they were often lying on the side, and there was water on. They were horrendous conditions, really, but you made more money working in the coal mines, which you probably deserved because of the conditions. And I know family life, it used to be the old thing about the bath, the bathtub, the tin bath. My father and them, they had that because they lived opposite the place called Victoria Buildings, which was everybody shared a toilet and things like that. Anyway, they got a house in Clapboard Gardens for the first time, had a bath in the facilities. But later on, they got baths put in at the coal mine, and they were able to have a bath before they came home. And most men cycled to work and that, and they had pit ponies. There must have been parts of the pit where they used to put timber in. Later on, they put steel hoops in, and that was an area where you could sort of walk at a crouch and maybe erect in some stage. They used to have pit ponies, and they used to pull the tubs to where the cage, so that they were taken up to the surface. And I think it was well over 1,000 feet they used to go down at Shilbottle. But Whittle, no, my other brother and my uncle worked at Whittle, and that was a drift mine, which meant that you travelled in at an angle down, And I'm not sure how far it was, but I know it was a drift mine. I worked in Australia, and we used to travel 7 miles into the mountainside before we went to our areas to work, And you had, it'd be the same at Shilbottle and Whittle. You had, on the sections of the railway, as they taught it, the tankies and that, there was cables hanging, and you'd pull the cable, and that would put a light on ahead of you and let anybody know that you were coming. There was transport coming, and there'd be lay-bys for people to get into so you could pass. And I believe it was the same here. And the camaraderie of them at the pits, it was always good. And there were Jenny big drinkers and like to gamble on the horses and the likes of that, pigeon men, allotment men, and they used to have the whippet racing and things like that, and it was all part of the mining community. And but the pits, they were what they used to tell me. My dad used to told me, my brothers went, but my dad used to say, never go down the pit, because he came out of the pits because he was involved in a roof fall, and the guy next to him got trapped, and he lost his life. And my father, he was trapped next to him. They got him out, and after that, my father came out of the coal mines, and he worked on the buildings. But those lads I went to school with, they spent their whole life in the coal mines till after what happened with the strikes and that, and that was their whole life, And we always used to envy them because us lads were working on the farms and different things like that, and they always had more money than us. But when you realise the conditions that they were in, they earned their money, That's what I would say about the local coal mines.
What about enjoyment in terms of you, when you were in Australia, your dad, your brothers and uncles, did they enjoy working down there?
Well, yes, I would say the majority of them did. I never heard, they used to complain about the conditions a bit, but they all were glad they were working in the pits, and they used to put themselves about to get a job at the pit. They always put their names down and that, you know, and sometimes you had to work on the screens, which was separating the coal from the stones and things like that, till you could get a place. And then once you got down the pit, there was what they call face workers and piece workers, and the piece workers and stone workers who went in and they removed the stone so you could get at the coal and things like that. But they all, you know, when they went to the club and things like that, they all talked well about it, and they always had their camaraderie and their fun and laughter. There was always jokes. The pitmen used to develop jokes, I think, more than anybody else. I'll just tell you a little story about that, if it's okay. There was this miner, we'll call him Henry, because that was his proper name, and leave it at that. Right, he used to like to go out to the club and that at a weekend. He liked to drink, you see, always liked to drink. And come Monday, on a regular basis, you'd think, I'll just give it a miss today. And he would go to the doctors. And them day it was an old doctor, Kenley side, who knew. The family doctor knew everybody then. And he'd go, and the doctor had said to him, this is a true story, this, the doctor had said to him, now then, Henry, what seems to be the matter with you today? He says, I've come to you to find out, doctor. Oh, I see. He says, I suppose you want to know it, do you? And he says, well, you can see your way clear, doctor. So the doctor gave him the note. And whether Henry could read or not, I couldn't tell you. But anyway, he put it in his pocket. And he went to the pubs, went home, went to bed, came to the pit the next day, handed the note in. And when he came out of the pit in the evening, the under manager said to him, Henry, Robson, the manager, wants in his office. So Henry went into the office, and he says, yes, Mr. Robson, you want me? Yes, Henry. He says, you were off yesterday. He says, well, Mr. Robson, he says, I put a note in. He says, that's what I wanted to see you about. He says, all it's got in the note's a stroke. He says, well, that's what I must have had. And he says, you cheeky bugger. He says, get out of here and don't you dare have, he was a good worker, he says, don't you dare have another Monday off. And that's a true story. Stroke, he says, that's what I must have had. So that's the humour. That was the humour of them. So, and there was a lot of them, you could tell they were miners, because if they got cut, the coal dust got in, and it would leave a blue scar on them, you know. And I mean, if you had gone to some process, you probably could have gotten it out, but it healed up, and they never poisoned anything. It must have been something in the coal. But you could tell a lot of miners had the blue scars on them. They didn't need to be tattooed. They had marks on them from the coals, you know. And there was, I can only remember one time at Shillbottle when something went wrong with the cage and it went down at a rate of knots. And I think it hit the bottom, and I think there was life lost, but the other ones, they never sort of worked again. But that few and far between episodes like that, you know. And
what are your memories of the mining strike?
my memories are, well, none of them are good, you know. The only good things that I can remember about the miners' strike was how people came together, and the miners that were on strike, the people took food parcels and that. I think the majority of the community was with them because they were taken into that area, you know, and they were trying to change their conditions and things like that in an unfair way. And the working man, that's what he's left with, to go on strike at the finish if they can't. And they'll take you into that area if they can, hoping that you'll give in and you won't take it, you know. But that's not what happened. But Margaret Thatcher, being as she was, she orchestrated that. She built the police forces up. She had a plan, she had an agenda, and she built the police forces up, and she had people ready for to drive trucks and that into places that would be strike breaking. And during the strike, there was people that spoke about it later, and there was actually soldiers with police uniforms on. They weren't involved in any of the violence or anything. They were just the ones that had the shields and were holding back. But there were definitely soldiers amongst them. And those were the deceitful things that they did. And she was meant on destroying that, because if she could destroy the miners' union, she had the other unions, you know. I mean, people think that striking, it's only sometimes the only thing that's left to a working man, to strike, you know, and it's not, nobody enjoys going on strike because it's a hardship. But if that's what you've got to do, you've got to do. When you remember the Jarrah March and things like that, and there were harder times then if they were prepared to do that. But anyway, what I remember about them was the miners, when it got to the part where they were doing, Thatcher had the police cordons and all that there, and they were banging on their shields to intimidate the people. But then when they chased the miners forward and opened their ranks, and, you know, them horses supposed to be trained to move away crowds sideways, pushing, shoving, and they'd done like a cavalry charge in, and they were running over the top of people. And as soon as they were down, the police was in, beating them with their truncheons. And you could tell by the look of them, they were relishing it, a lot of them. And that broke down the communities, things like that. That was never put right. And she was, you know, the Iron Lady, I will not, the lady's not for turning. And she was just the same as that. And off she went. She even got an American bloke across here, I've forgotten his name, and he was going about with a paper bag over his head, which made a fool of it, you know. And Arthur Scarhill, Joe Gormley, he was a less aggressive sort of leader, and he was trying to go down a different avenue. What they should have done, really, was run the coal stocks down. They were putting top targets of coal out of the mines at that time. They were hitting top targets of the produce out of the mines, you know. And but they should have run that down, overtime bans and things like that. But they didn't do that. They were badly led into it, and she knew that, and she provoked them into doing that, and it just happened, and there it was. And it was on the television. You've seen it all on the television. It used to wind you up. And that woman, she used to... One of the things that I remember about Margaret Thatcher was she used to talk about, and that upsets me, because my brother was a miner, but he was also a prisoner with the Japanese for 4.5 years, and he fought for his country, and he stood up for what the country meant, and he put himself through agonies as a prisoner, and she had the audacity to call them the enemy within. No, she was the enemy within, that woman, you know. And she didn't just destroy the miners, she destroyed mining communities, homes, home lives, children, the whole communities went to bits afterwards. And village policemen had to be moved away because they had a camaraderie with the village people. And after that, nobody trusted the policemen for a long time. And the thing was, as well, they were getting a lot of overtime, the policemen, and they were showing their checks. You've seen it on the television, showing their checks to the miners and saying, "Carry on, lads, keep it up, look at this, I'm getting another car," and things like that. Well, if that doesn't wind you up, I'm not very sure what will, you know. And but there was deeper things into it, you know, and it was well planned. And the people used to come out, and the ministers used to come out and say horrendous, ridiculous things. And it was all a devious plan to destroy the miners' union